I'm Connor Rogers from NBC Sports alongside Big Ten analyst Joshua Perry, and we got a new updated top 10 players from the Big Ten. Listen, I'm going to be honest with you, Joshua. About a halfway point of the season at best. We're halfway through October here. There's not a wild amount of movement, but number 10 is the only newcomer to the list, and that's cornerback Denzel Burke out of Ohio State, a guy that was really interesting to me because great athlete, had an awesome freshman year for the Buckeyes, kind of a slower second year, and he's put it all together this year. A former high school wide receiver. You see the athleticism, you see the length. I was really jacked up to get him on the list this time.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely had a sophomore slump, and so I think the mentality to rebound was huge for him. But you mentioned all the physical traits. Like, he's a guy who can run. He's physical when he needs to be. He's got really good ball tracking skills too. And you see a lot of guys nowadays that can't find the ball in coverage, and they end up getting penalties. Thought he's done a really good job of that. And I think the more and more you watch him, the more and more teams are saying we're not going to throw the football over to his side, right? So you got a guy who can really lock down one half of the football field. I like where he's been. He's got some big tests coming up later on in the schedule, but as long as he can hold up, he's a surefire guy that teams are going to be interested in.
Yeah, we're going to learn even more about him as he tries to play his way into the first round. Now we get to the familiar names, but maybe not a familiar order. And this is a guy that dropped not too far in Emeka Ibuka from the same program, Ohio State. I had him at 7 the last time we went over this. Now he goes to 9. I think a lot of this has been out of his hands. I still think Ibuka is a really talented player. He has some polish at a position in college that's not always a common trait. But I also think there's been times where the passing offense has held him back. I think some guys have just honestly been more impressive that have been able to jump him throughout this. And it's always tough, Joshua, when you share an offense, you share the ball with maybe the best player in the country in Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I mean, Emeka Ibuka has been really good. And I think a lot of it comes down to his route running, his fluidity. He's a guy who can certainly run away from players, and he's a bigger athlete than I think he gets credit for. So he holds up well in the middle of the field when guys are trying to hit him. But to your point, maybe the production doesn't feel congruent with what he actually is as a player, and part of that's quarterback and a little bit of offensive line. And I think what could really help his value in a lot of ways too is on special teams. He's standing back there fielding punts, and we never really get to see him return. So I think there's still a next level to unlocking his game. We've seen him when he's really good. He's had big moments this year, no doubt. But compared to the way that some of the other guys have performed early on this year, I could see why he's moving down this list.
And one of those guys is Tyler Nuben, the safety out of Minnesota that goes from 9 up to 8. I mean, 3 picks in the first 6 games for Minnesota. This is nothing new that we've seen from him. He's somebody that maybe could have declared after last year and been starting in an NFL secondary this year. He opts to go back to school. He looks fantastic. And for me, Joshua, it's the sideline to sideline range.
Mm-hmm.
It's the pre-snap IQ. This is somebody that understands where to be lined up. He can handle a lot of different responsibilities at the safety position.
Yep.
It's really dangerous to say this about a college player, but if you're looking for pro readiness at the safety position, Nuben has it.
Yeah, he's really smart. I'm glad you brought up the pre-snap IQ. I've talked to him multiple times and covered one of his games this year against Michigan. And he is a guy who really is about the game of football, watches a ton of tape, and it shows up there. And then the way that they utilize him as well. And you mentioned some of that versatility and the sideline to sideline nature, but we've seen the interceptions and what he can do in the open field. They put him at linebacker level and ask him to get involved in some run support, and he's willing in there. And they've also blitzed him. He's been able to affect the quarterback, not just by taking the football away in the pass game, but also applying pressure. And that's a guy that I like, because the way that the game of football is played right now, if you can have a player who can help you in multiple ways, now when you're facing an offense that's giving you different personnel and certain adjustments, you can keep the one player in. He's a guy that can do that.
Absolutely. So we go to number 7, which is Kris Jenkins, who was number 8 the last time we did this. And unlike a lot of the previous players we've discussed, Jenkins is not a guy that's going to fill up the stat sheet. That's not necessarily his job. If you want to look at the prototype dirty work player across college football, Jenkins is so strong at the point of the attack. He could stack and shed. He can 2-gap. He could do so many different things for this Michigan front that frees up space for the linebackers, that allows defensive ends to get in matchups on an island. Jenkins is somebody that I think his floor is set. He's going to be a high floor NFL run defender. Whatever he can improve upon down the stretch this year as a pass rusher will be the difference of him being maybe a top 20 pick and just a guy in the top 50.
And for me, I think that the upside is there as a rusher because he's a better athlete than a lot of people give him credit for at his size. I think the best play he had this year was against Bowling Green, where they're throwing a screen and he's able to recognize what it is. And to your point, not the greatest pass rusher ever. Like they're not just letting you run back there. Recognizes it's a screen, gets in the throwing lane, then takes the football away. And I think that is something innate in his game that a lot of other guys at that position just don't have. So when you talk about a guy having his floor set, that's the play to me, right? Like that is a guy who can step into the NFL and play right away.
Absolutely. And just like his dad, Kris Jenkins Jr. will do the same exact thing. So, number 6 is a player that stays pat, and that's Cooper DeJean, the cornerback from Iowa, a bit of a do it all player in the secondary. We've seen him return a punt for a touchdown this year, coming off a year where he had 5 interceptions. We know ball production can be, a little not fluky necessarily, but a little bit all over the place at the college level. Well, he's already got 2 this year. He's somebody that he just finds the football in the air. He's a really good tackler. I think he could play the big nickel position at the next level. I think he could stay at corner if a team asks him to do that, or be a traditional safety. You love the special teams work. Cooper DeJean is one of the more versatile players in the entire country.
Yeah, and the tackling, I think, is the biggest thing for me. I evaluate guys on the outside, and I think it's a willingness to hit that sets him apart a lot of times. When the ball is in the air, he tracks it like a wide receiver, which I think is a great skill to have. And I think taking the football away is the most important thing you can do on defense. But he's also got the special teams ability where they put him back there as a returner, and he can break the game wide open there. He has not backed down from any challenge. Like he loves being the guy that has to lock down the best wide receiver that he's going against. And I think that mentality translates too.
Number 5 is Kina King, who came in at number 3 to start the year. And the fall, once again, it's kind of like Ibuka, where I don't really see Kina King much differently. Sure, he's a smaller corner, but he's feisty, he's sticky, he knows how to match and mirror in coverage. I think the thing this year for me, Joshua, there's not a lot to watch of him in terms of how often quarterbacks go at him. The guy is barely targeted throughout any game.
Yeah, I think that's it right there. Like, if I were game planning against Penn State, I'm not throwing at that guy. He's a
Right.
really good player. The other part about it, too, is his defensive line has been so impactful on games that, like, there are teams that don't have the opportunity to hold it long enough to even try to target him. So I'm there with you. Again, you mentioned the physicality that he brings in terms of being a guy who's a willing hitter and run support. He's a guy who can blow up screen passes as well with a quick trigger. All of those things, I think, really stand out about his game.
Number 4, Jerzon Johnny Newton, the interior defensive lineman from Illinois. And speaking of that Penn State team, I thought Johnny Newton single-handedly kept Illinois in the game against Penn State this year. I mean, the way you could play this guy up and down the line of scrimmage, he's got juice as a pass rusher. You see the athleticism when he's in pursue mode, a former high school running back, which is really remarkable at his size. But his ability against the run, once again, whether it's stack and shedding, the awareness, the read and react, Johnny Newton is another one of those guys, high floor, but a better pass rusher than Jenkins, and the guy that always jumps out on the Illinois tape.
Really disruptive, right? He's got heavy hands. He's got quick hands. He's got really good feet. I love the way his hips move for a big guy. You mentioned that they can play him up and down that defensive line, and I think that creates matchups that are favorable for him as well. The biggest thing that you had talked about is, you see the athleticism in pursuit. I see the effort. A lot of times those big guys don't want to run out the stack, right? Like they're not trying to chase a play down. He wants to make all of the plays. And quite frankly, the way that the Illinois season has gone up to this point, there could be a reason for a guy that good to check out, and he hasn't. Like he's an impressive player to watch every week.
So you mentioned the Nittany Lions pass rush when we talked about Kina King and how that can help out their secondary. Chop Robinson comes in at number 3. He's a bit of a riser here. And I know you and I really liked Chop the last time we talked about him. Through this portion of the season, we've seen it all. The way he keeps tackles off balance, whether it's the burst, the bend, the handwork, the leverage. Chop Robinson is a really impressive player that it seems like to me he's only getting better each week. And I really like that Penn State has used him as a stand-up rusher over interior offensive linemen as well, which is kind of funny when you look at how the Cowboys use Micah Parsons right now, another Penn State alumni. Chop Robinson could be the top pass rusher taken in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, they're using his athleticism to an advantage against kind of the heavier footed guys on the interior there. And you mentioned that he has all of the tools that a pass rusher should have. He's got the speed. He knows how to use his hands. He can get under people's pads and kind of bull rush them back too. And I think that's where his game has evolved. A lot of times, I think pass rushers come out and they're a bit raw. But once you really start learning the art of how to get after the quarterback, it takes your game to the next level. And I think he's more advanced than a lot of other guys in this conference at that part of it too.
So we stay at Penn State here for number 2. That's Olu Falshanu, the tackle prospect that once again could have probably been a top 10, top 5 guy last year. I think for me with Falshanu right now, Joshua, is that you don't see a lot of guys this good in pass pro at the college level on an island. It's the feet, it's the hands, it's the length. If I was building a tackle in a lab, it would look like Olu.
Yeah, and I had questions about him coming out of last year. I knew he was really good, but I felt a lot of it was projection. He was still a bit of an unfinished product, and now you're starting to see it. And he, again, light on his feet. I love the way that he manipulates his hands too, because he'll wait for the defender to shoot him, and then he'll kind of get the advantage from knowing where the hand placement's going to come. That's kind of a 300 or 400 level attack to pass protection there. He's lived up to the hype and the expectation. A lot of it coming this year, but he's performed extremely well.
And number 1, not a big surprise here in Marvin Harrison Jr., the size, the speed, the pedigree. I will say, and I'd love your take on this, Joshua, is that it feels like he misses CJ Stroud a little bit just from the timing and the rhythm and how, polished CJ was at the position and the opportunities that he was giving Marvin Harrison Jr. in terms of stat production. There's a couple times on tape where it's like, man, he's open and the ball might be a little bit late. This is the same guy that we thought coming into the season is a special wide receiver prospect.
He is, and he's definitely missing CJ Stroud. Kyle McCord has probably helped Marv out a little bit just from some of the passes that maybe weren't perfectly on point, and Marv's had to make a really good catch on him. And we knew that he was great when it came to tracking the ball and contested catches specifically. I think the biggest place where his game has to improve is at the line of scrimmage. I'm not convinced that his releases are as good as they can be and that he gets off of press extremely well, but super fast, a lot faster than I think people really see because he makes everything look so easy. And he tracks the ball as well as anybody playing college football right now.
Yeah, and we'll see him in some big-time matchups down the stretch that can only help his draft stock going forward. For the full top 10 prospects from the Big Ten, you can read it for free at NBCSports.com. For Joshua, I'm Connor. We'll talk to you soon.